That was an annoyingly late start, and my music is for some reason missing. Hello everyone, I'm Jack, Loud Panda, and I hope everyone's doing very well tonight. It's good to see you all again. I'm back for another reading night with Red Dwarf Backwards by Rob Grant. I have my tea, I even have a cherry bakewell tonight. Just a big slice. Quite excited. I'm here in my blanket. I spent so long trying to figure stuff out with, I was trying to get a little guitar thing sorted out because I have that song, or the part of the song that I want to play. But it never works very well, but I can't figure out how to use this properly. So whenever I try to use the guitar, it just goes really weird. And it isn't usable, so I gave up. But never mind. Yes, so got my tea, I've got my slice of bakewell, cherry bakewell, and I've got my book, and I'm ready to go. Just wanted to wait a couple minutes more for other people to arrive, but given that I went over on the time limit, on the time entry thing, I was only going to have it for like 3 minutes and cut it down a bit, but because I still had to feed the cat, which I'd honestly forgotten to do, and had to make the tea, it went on for a little bit longer than I was expecting it to, so I apologise for that. On the upside... Ow, hot. On the upside, I'm not... Hey, Commander, how you doing? On the upside, I'm not as dehydrated as I was the other day after playing 14 hours of Final Fantasy XIV, which I really loved, and also most of the tea's gone because it's all been absorbed into the tea leaves. I should have done 2 litres of water for this kettle. I don't even think it's going to make 1 whole cup. At least not 1 whole cup of this. Oh, hey, Jules. Yeah. I suppose that's true, but still. I wanted to cut down the entry time for a little bit, but never mind. Oh, crap. I didn't actually change the title. Please let me know if this changes the title. Just give me a second. Ba-ba-ba-ba. And I think just gonna try and sort this out. Come on. Reading aloud. There we go. And then one more, and just chatting. Does that change the title for anyone else? Should be British Panda Reads British Book. Good, thank you. The new microwave, trying to see if you can install it yourself or need someone to do it for you. Is it not just one that you like plug in? Because that's what I always think of when I use a microwave. It's just the ones that I could just plug into a wall socket. In fact, when I was getting my kitchen done, I ate most of my food out of a microwave. Or well, you know, I cooked it in the microwave and then ate it. Otherwise it would have been extra messy. And I wouldn't have cooked at all. I would have just eaten ham or something. Anyway. Okay, so it's an over-the-range one, so it has to be mounted. Oh dear. I didn't realise that was a thing. Makes me glad all of mine are mostly installed. Mostly just standalone. Although I guess now I have a microwave that's built into my oven. So that's the one that I use now. But it's mostly like regular standalone microwaves for 20 years I can think of. I'm wondering if... I don't know if Smooth is actually going to come and watch, because I think he got very bored of Red Dwarf now. So I don't know if he's going to be here or not. Or whether or not he's... I told him to actually cook himself something earlier on. I don't know if he's taken it... if he's been offended by my telling him to go and actually cook for a change. Instead of eating ramen. And jerky. Because that's all he does. He says he doesn't like eating... He doesn't like cooking because it takes time. He doesn't like washing up because it takes time. And then he also says he doesn't have enough time to enjoy the food he eats. So therefore, he doesn't cook. It's like, well, stop asking me to cook stuff for you. Yeah, well, someone has to. He doesn't look out for himself. Unless it involves his car. It's very irresponsible. He can't just eat junk like that all the time. Let's see if this tea is any good or not. Ow, 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 the lid. Ow. The lid's made of steel too. Ow. I'm drinking the Blue Lady Earl Grey tonight. Because Pear was talking about it the other day and it made me think of it. Ah, it's good. It's good tea. Black. Okay. Right then, so. Yes, last we left off. Where were we? Oh yes, so. We just left off with all the boys realizing that they are now stuck on backwards Earth because they've missed their window of travel. So they are stuck there now. And unless they actually go or get back, then they will just keep de-aging the longer they're there until they all end up as small children again. Well, most of them. Rimmer and Crichton are going to be fine, but the other two can de-age. And finish that chapter after they realised that Crichton was the one that killed the hillbilly. After they realised the one that Crichton killed the... after they realised that Crichton killed the hillbilly, and they found that they were now stuck there. And that was where it ended. For the next 10 years, I think. And part 2, which we're now starting... It's called Smoke Me a Kipper. I'll be back for breakfast. Which I believe is named for the catchphrase of one Ace Rimmer, the alternate reality Rimmer of a much more charismatic and manly standard. Hey, Kath, how you doing? You doing okay? Nice to see you. And oh yeah, and I've got a new blanket too. It's much more akin to the one I actually own. But has less ear room, so I'm not wearing the hood today. Anyway, right, so let's start off as we usually do with the intro theme. And I want to do this just because... give me a second. I want to do this just because it seems dumb and it seems fun. Well, it's going to be difficult for me to do while wearing a blanket, but I'll figure it out, I'm sure. Won't I? I'll have to figure something out. There we go. Okay. Right then. So we're all going to do the intro now. Off goes the music. And here comes the intro. So, 3, 2, 1. Yay! Wanted to do that because it was silly, but yay. I like that intro. Anyway, so here we go. Part 2. Chapter 1. And hey, Smooth. I think cool's too strong a word. Although yes, I know I'm cool, but I just like that intro. Okay. Billy Joe Epstein knew he was a coward. What's more, he knew everyone else knew it too. He gave it off, stank of it somehow, emanated it, like the stench from a weak dead skunk. And on this Saturday night, he sat hunched over his usual bar space, on his usual bar stool, over his usual drink, emanating away and trying to get drunk enough to help him forget he was a coward. Which, as usual, was not going to work. Billy Joe, call sign the Jewish Cowboy, was 19 years old and he knew just about all there was to know about piloting state-of-the-art Space Corps craft. He sailed through the written tests, breezed through the oral exams, excelled at the theory, and in 2 days' time, he was going to get thrown out of the Corps. The day after tomorrow, he was going to take and fail his final Space Corps examination flight for the third and therefore last time. Because when it came to the dangerous stuff, the low-level passes over the high-gravity rock deserts of Miranda, Billy Joe Epstein would, at the last moment, lose his nerve and veer away. Because, as they said behind his back in the locker room, Billy Joe just didn't have the love spuds. He looked down into his shot glass and saw his own cowardly reflection staring at him contemptuously in the treacle-coloured liquor, so he drained it and looked up to order another one. She didn't see him, of course. She never seemed to be looking in his direction, even if he was the only one in the bar, which was not uncommon. But that was fine by Billy Joe, because it gave him more chance to be looking at her. Her name was Mamie. Not that Billy Joe had ever plucked up the courage to call her by her name. She was, well, better than him. She could have her pick of the jocks who jostled the bar, to have the honour of flirting with her, and she wouldn't even give them the time of day. She was special. Her hair, well, you wouldn't say it was brunette, and you couldn't say she was a redhead either. In between, kind of, depending on the light. And her eyes weren't blue, and they weren't green, you get the idea. And Billy Joe didn't converse with her at all, except to order his drinks and keep his manners with please and thank you. Anything else would have just been inconceivable. The thought, even, when it had the temerity to creep into his mind of actually asking her out on a date, made him feel like someone was twisting his stomach bag at both ends with a high-tension torque wrench. While he was waiting for her to notice he wanted serving, Billy Joe felt a tap on his left shoulder. He turned to stare into a gleaming row of medals. "I believe you're in my seat, Sonny." Billy Joe looked around. There was no one else in the bar room. There were 9 empty stools. Count them, 9, ranked along the bar. Mamie was looking over now. He felt his ears began to glow. He glanced at the jock's armband. A commander. "Sure," Billy Joe shrugged. "Sorry." He slipped over to the adjacent seat, as manfully as he could. As manfully as he could, even. "What stinking luck," the commander grinned. "That one's mine as well." Billy Joe was smiling. Not out of bravado, but because his face didn't know what else to do with itself. Was this officer trying to pick a fight? Mamie stepped over and asked Billy Joe, "What'll it be?" "I was here first, old love." The commander smiled pleasantly. "No, you weren't," Mamie returned with a smile. The commander's hand shot out rattlesnake fast and grabbed Mamie's wrist. "Let's not have any back chat, old love." His smile remained even and calm. Mamie didn't make a sound, but Billy Joe could see she was hurting. He cleared his throat. "I think maybe you've probably had a couple too many drinks, sir." He tried to make it sound as uncontentious as possible. "Maybe you probably should think about possibly not manhandling the lady that way, you reckon?" The officer's smile broadened. He dropped Mamie's wrist. "You feel possibly, perhaps you may be man enough to probably stop me, you reckon?" he parodied. Sir? Billy Joe stuttered. Oh, let's forget about rank here, laddie. The officer slipped off his jacket, its medals clanking musically as he laid it carefully on the bar stool. Let's forget I'm your superior officer. Let's forget my gold bars, my medals, and my unarmed combat training officer badge, and let's just do it. Billy Joe's face was still wearing the same smile it came in with, and his ears felt like they were about to burst into flames as he watched the officer calmly rolling up his shirt sleeves. There really is no need. It was only a one-syllable word, but Billy Joe started it perpendicularly and ended it horizontally. He had no idea where the blow had hit him, but his whole face hurt. He looked up. The officer was already rolling his sleeves back down, as if that one blow would be enough to keep Billy Joe Epstein down and keep him there. Something about that made Billy Joe mad. Mad enough to make him ignore his instinct to stay down and play dead. Mad enough to make him get to his feet and square up to the man. He felt ridiculous. He didn't know how to fight. He didn't even know how to stand for a fight. He tried hunching up and making small, tight circles with his bunched fists, but he felt he was in Tom Brown's school days or something. All his life he'd avoided fights, and now here he was, picking one, or picking his first one, with a multi-decorated officer who specialised in unarmed combat and could probably kill him 8 different ways with each of his fingers. The officer raised his eyebrows in delight. "Your game, sonny," he glinted. "Splendiferous stuff. Needed something to get the old circulation going in the fistaroonies." Billy Joe actually saw the second blow. He didn't see it quite quickly enough to avoid it, but it was definitely an improvement, he felt, as it landed on his left ear, hard enough to rattle his brain against his skull like a caged budgeria in an earthquake. 8 ways with each finger. Hey, Krista? How you doing? Where was I? Although it felt like it was probably futile to even try, he launched a punch of his own. His vision wasn't exactly clear, but he aimed roughly at the centre of the vibrating image of the officer, and was surprised when his knuckles made contact with flesh and bone. The officer drew his hand across his lip and looked oddly at the smear of blood, as if it wasn't real, couldn't be happening. Billy Joe hit him again. The officer staggered back. He shook his head, his composure was gone. Anger sprang to his face, and snarling, he leapt at Billy Joe like a rabid wolf. Billy Joe twisted to one side, using the man's momentum against him, and helped him tidily over the bar, where he crashed spectacularly into a stack of bottles promoting clear-head, alcohol-free vodka. Billy Joe stood where he was, making his Tom Brown circles with his fists, until it became obvious that the officer wasn't going to get up again. Then Billy Joe grabbed the commander's jacket. He was astonished how heavy the clattering medals were, and dumped it over the bar on the opponent's groaning body. "Maybe you should think about leaving now, sir." The officer grunted, staggered to his feet, and crunched over the broken glass and out of the bar without looking back. "You wanted a drink?" Billy Joe turned from the door. Mamie was smiling at him. At him? He shook his head. "I don't think so." "On the house?" "No thanks. I've got a big flight exam in a couple of days. I should keep a clear head." "Well," she smiled again. "Any time." "That's right, kind." He flicked her a salute and turned to go. "Good luck with the test, Billy Joe." He almost froze at the door, but he managed to keep walking. She knew his name. Maybe he'd pluck up the courage to ask her out after all. Maybe he was less of a coward than he thought. He might even have the love spuds to make that low-level flight. He made a deal with himself. If he could do that, he could ask Mamie out to the passing out ball. He caught a glimpse of something glimmering in his right hand. He opened his palm. A St. Christopher medal. He must have grabbed it during the fight. He slipped it into his pocket and forgot about it. And that simple act would save quite a few lives. Chapter 2. Admiral Peter Tranter had several names, most of which he knew and approved of, and a few he didn't know and certainly wouldn't have enjoyed. To his peers, he was known as Bungo, though no one could really recall why. To the rank and file, he was known predictably as the Admiral, or the Old Man. To his valet, Kevin, he was himself, or in the dark recesses of the R&R Club, after a bout of intense bad humour and several gimlets, skunkfoot and vinegar draws, his mistress called him Bun Bun to his face. Behind his back, she called him Cheese. Right now, Vinegar Draws was doing his best to destroy the pile on his absurdly luxurious carpet in his ridiculously large office as he paced distractedly around his obscenely huge desk. He wasn't much of an admiral, just a one-star job. He commanded the Space Corps Research and Development Program, which, despite its impressive title and even more impressive budget, was the smallest base in the Corps, and his post was generally regarded as the least demanding in the Admiralty. Which was why, of course, he'd commandeered such an unfeasibly spacious office, ordered in the disproportionately massive desk, and padded around in his legendarily stinky footwear on a carpet so thick that the golf balls could and did get lost in it. It was his way of bestowing rank upon himself. He'd been a high flyer once, one of the youngest officers ever to achieve the command star. Then, inexplicably, the proud purring engine of his career had futtered and stopped. He'd received a series of increasingly obvious sideways postings until this one, the ultimate dead-end gig. There was no sideways from R&D, only up or out. He'd spent many long hours wondering about the why of it. He'd let it affect his work, his alcohol consumption, his personal hygiene, and worst of all, unless you were his valet, he'd let it affect his marriage. He tormented himself with increasingly paranoid explanations. Was there some kind of plot among the faceless pen pushers of the Space Corps administration to keep his best men down and promote only fools and dickwits? Had it been something he'd said, offhand at some luncheon somewhere, which had so offended some superior that the only fitting revenge had been to keep Tranter in permanent lustreless mediocrity? He'd almost resigned himself to a dull dramatic career, where he never had to make a serious decision, contribute to policy planning, or achieve anything more significant or earth-shattering than shagging his mistress from the multitudinous angles offered by his overly humongous and otherwise redundant desk when Project Wildfire came along. Project Wildfire. Bun Bun's ticket up and out of here. The problem with space travel research was that humankind seemed to have reached the upper limits of its capabilities. The last significant advance in the field, demi-light-speed drives, had been achieved before Bungo had been born. Of course, there were always minor improvements, tweaks to make engines more efficient, a new formula for cleaner, cheaper fuel, but nothing major. A few years back, Cheese had become quite excited about the prospects for matter transferent devices. But after endless months of loading various rodents into the sending stations and scraping out gerbil molecular mulch from the remote receivers, even the most fervent advocates of MT had stopped bugging him for more budget. Project Wildfire was different. Project Wildfire was the code name for a prototype craft that, theoretically, could break the big one. It could break the speed limit of the universe, the light barrier. And it worked. Sort of. It promised new horizons for the human race, virtually instantaneous travel, the exploration of hitherto unexplorable star systems, and most magnificent of all, another pip for Admiral Skunkfoot. And now, just days before the inaugural test flight, disaster. The test ship had returned. It had returned approximately 3 days before it set off. Not a terrible result if you chose to look at the upside. They now had 2 Wildfire ships for the price of 1. No small beer considering the cost of the damn thing, and as a rather pleasant side effect, they appeared to have devised some form of time travel. On the downside, however, there were clearly some flaws in the design, evidenced by the fact that the returning craft had been damaged beyond repair and its pilot charred dead and almost unidentifiable. Almost. So this was Tranter's dilemma. This was why he paced with nervous fury around his prop from the land of the giant's desk. Hey, Nico. I am a bugbear indeed. Better than being a bugbear, though. Did he call off the mission and risk his one great shot at personal advancement? Or did he send his best and most respected officer, his best pilot, to a certain and unspeakable death? I will, thank you. I hope you have a good day. Of course, he'd already made the decision, though he couldn't acknowledge it. What he was really agonising over was his justification for it. Surely, since the craft had already returned, he was duty-bound to send it off. In fact, did he really have a decision to make? Wasn't it inevitable? Causality and all that. Didn't he owe it to history to embark on this, the next stage of humankind's technical evolution? Didn't he really, really, really need that extra pip? And who do you think is going to get put on that ship? Almost up to chapter 3. I am going to have some tea. Because it's going to go cold otherwise. I hope everyone else has blankets and tea. Or some similar variety. Caffeine or something like that. I'm very glad Pear mentioned the Blue Lady Earl Grey. Coffee and a cape, good enough. It's no blanket, but it will do. I should wrap myself up a bit tighter in my blanket. Yeah. Right then. And hearing beeping. It's Discord, yep. Shush, Discord. Okay. Right then. A bottle of water and it's warm. So warm you have the fan on. Dear. How is it that warm? Or is it just that they keep the heating on in your building? So I just realised if I put my book in front of my face, then it gets cut off nearly completely. Okay, anyway. Really hope I don't get blanket fluff all over my bakewell. Right then. Middle of an open field in the deep, dark south. Oh, well, that explains it. Chapter 3. It was a curious feeling, no question, staring at the blackened remnants of your own grinning skull. Hard not to shudder, though Ace fought off the impulse. He peered into the sightless sockets of the charred doppelganger, as if he expected some glimmer of recognition to flicker back at him from the dull, dead darkness. The technical boys were off checking and rechecking the DNA profile, but Commander Rimmer didn't need any chemical verification. It was his skull, all right, tautened into the familiar, obscene leer of sudden heat death. There was the gold tooth, a trophy from the rebooting, a trophy from the Academy boxing finals in his second year. There was the small nick to the right of his forehead from the childhood game of Cowboys and Indians, when his brothers had cast him as General Custer while they played the show? Not sure how to pronounce that. Sioux. The Show Nation. I'm going to go with that for now. I apologise to any Native Americans. Sioux. I'm guessing it's a Native American tribe, but I can't pronounce it for the life of me. Sioux. Oh, okay. So, yeah. There was a small nick to the right of his forehead from the childhood game of Cowboys and Indians when his brothers had cast him as General Custer while they played the Sioux Nation, and Howard had got carried away and slung a real tomahawk at him. He tightened his mouth in a grim parody of a smile, and slid his gaze down to the flight suit, remarkably intact considering the temperatures it must have endured. Ace made a mental note to write up the manufacturers and commend them for their workmanship. He paused momentarily on the tortured metal of his badge of rank, and then tried, once again, to study the wrecked control panel, an exploding mess of wires and screens jutting out from the twisted fascia of the cockpit. There was something out of kilter here, something that shouldn't have been, something important. He called down to the shower of sparks spattering from under the scorched nose cone. "Spanners, old love." The dark spray stopped. The spark spray stopped there, as the hot rasp of the oxetylene died. "Yeah? You say you've checked out the dash?" "A dozen times. What's left of it? And it all seems tick-tock." "I don't know. There's something about it that bugs me." The wheels on the trolley of his inspection board squealed against the hangar's rough tarmac as Lister slid out from under the craft and tugged up his welding mask. "Can't put my finger on it." He stared up at the glare of the skylight and studied the paradox of Commander Rimmer's silhouette inspecting itself. Lister's facial muscles yanked his lower lip a quarter of an inch higher. In Hangar 101, good quality smiles were in short supply this particular day. "You're not going, you know." "How's that, matey?" Ace prodded at the buckled temperature gauge, which was partially obscured by the melted mess of his St. Christopher medallion. "Not unless we work out what went wrong." "Don't you start going soft on me, Spanners. You heard what the old man said. This match kicks off at 0600 in the AM, and I'm the centre forward." "I heard what he actually said was, it's up to you." "That's the way a gentleman orders another gentleman on a suicide mission, Spanners. It's just good form." "Good form? Good form? You're going to get barbecued up there? And you're talking like it's another topping adventure for the famous five?" Ace lowered his shades and hopped the 15 feet down from the cockpit and landed on the tarmac with the easy grace of a prepubescent Russian gymnast. "Look." He took out a spotless handkerchief and wiped the sooty grime from his perfectly manicured fingers. "Come what may, I'm going to this party, Spanners. It's the chance of a lifetime. Every test jock dreams of getting just one single shot at cracking one away over the boundary. This is mine, and I wouldn't miss it for all the bouillabaisse in Provence." Lister forked his hand through the thick wire brush of his regulation crop. "I could stop you, you know." Ace tilted his head, though his eyebrows stayed parallel with the ground. "I don't think I quite caught that, old chum." "It'd take about 5 seconds to do a number on the engine that put schedule back months." "By God, the acoustics in here are dismal. Otherwise, I might have heard a dear friend of mine suggest a court spatial offence like sabotage. And that would never do now, would it?" "Listen to me. We all accept we're working on cutting edge of technology here, and that means there's always going to be a little bit of risk. This is different. This isn't a little bit of risk, Ace. That's you up there, looking like the last spare rib in a Chinese takeaway on a Saturday night. It's you. And from what I could follow on what those tech guys were saying, there's nothing we can do about it. It's already happened. It's inevitable." "I don't believe they're right, Spanners. Nothing's inevitable. No matter how bleak things seem, there's always a way through. That belief, that hope, that's the very thing about us that defines our humanity. I know I sound like a pompous nerd, and I'm sorry I can't be more fashionably cynical, but it's just not in my makeup pouch. Now what do you say we put a lid on all the chin-wagging, roll up our sleeves and comb every inch of this damned crate until we find out what went wrong and put it right?" Lister cracked a warped grin and shrugged with his forehead. "Your call, Ace. I'm just the grease monkey." "Grease monkey? Ha!" Ace mirrored his grin and slapped him heftily on the back. "You're the genius who builds the damn things. I'm just the airhead who wiggles the joystick. Now, do you manage to dig out the black box, you old tartlet?" Lister handed him the recording device he torched out of the cone section. "It was welded to the heatsink." He glanced at the peeling metal of the hull. "I hate to think what kind of temperatures this baby's been through." "Well, maybe we'll find out from this." Ace jemmied over the seal with an easy twist of the crowbar, while Lister dragged over the portable monitor and plugged in the leads. There was, it seemed to Lister, an unnecessary pause before Ace pressed the play button. Then he realised what the hesitation was about. The poor sod was steeling himself to watch his own death. "Look, Commander," he offered. "Shouldn't we get a softer tech? They're pretty keen to..." "All in good time, Spanners. We've got to see this for ourselves." And his elegantly cuticled fingernail flicked play. At first, the screen displayed the computer readout of the standard pre-flight instrument checks. Lister scanned the data. Everything seemed to be discouragingly normal. Ace craned closer to the screen. "Display's a bit dim, isn't it, old sausage?" "It might seem a bit less dim," Lister said, "if you took off your spinning shades." Ace smiled apologetically. "Like the preacher says, all is vanity." And he raised his sunglasses. Lister met his gaze. Commander Rimmer was sporting a black eye. A real Shine-a-rooney. A classic. Every tint of purple and blue rippled out from the epicenter of his bloodshot eye towards his cheekbone. Ace's expression said, "Don't ask." So Lister didn't. So it was true. He'd heard it, but he hadn't believed it. Commander Ace Rimmer had been given a tonking by Billy Joe Epstein. How was that possible? Ace tossed his head gently, so the soft wave of his fringe hung over the offending feature. They both turned their attention back to the screen. It was a short recording. The entire trip, launched to Blaze, had taken less than 15 minutes. And when it was over, they could still find no clues as to what happened, or, unthinkably, what was destined to happen, and how they might go about preventing it. There was a clue, though. In fact, there were 3 clues, staring out at them from the screen in every single frame of the recording. Dun dun dun. Tea time. Just going to make perpetual mouth noises while I drink. I know, Competent Lister is weird. Though it was fun in the show as well, even if we only got to see all of them, all of the cast for like 5 seconds each. And it gets much more interesting. Although I'm not sure why this Ace Rimmer went and attacked a small, basically not anywhere on his level, student of sorts. Because he sounded like he was just being an arse, but Ace Rimmer is supposed to be a really nice guy. So I don't see why this Ace Rimmer that we're following would be such a bully. Okay. Chapter 4. The contents of Lister's stomach lolloped queasily as he sipped at his 7th or 8th mug of disgusting coffee. He glanced at his watch without taking the readout. It was night, it was dark. Over the quadrangle there was a warm woman asleep in his bed with a dent in the mattress beside her, which he should have been occupying, and that was all he needed to know about the time. He tried to focus once again on the looped recording he'd made of the black box tape. The original had been commandeered, and was now being pored over by the overpaid research staff in their air-conditioned lab, with a plentiful supply of hot snacks and good fresh coffee to hand, while Lister shivered in the fume-laden yawn of Hangar 101, wondering whether to spend the last of his loose change on the oxymoronically named Tasty Noodle Pot from the dispensing machine, or save it for a final mug of the foul coffee. It had been a while since he pulled a round-the-clock shift, but the symptoms of exhaustion were as familiar as an old friend. Right now he was experiencing the big gloom phase which always hit just before the dawn, when he began to feel resentful of regular people, sleeping their sane sleep in their sensible beds with the normal daylight hours jobs. Part of his body started becoming forgetful about how to perform the most basic operations. His mouth would neglect its swallowing duties, and he'd suddenly realised drool had caked on his chin. His buttocks wouldn't shift frequently enough in his chair, and sharp pains would shoot up his back, urging him to kindly remember to move now and then, if you please, because there's plenty more where that came from. Time would start dragging and jumping teasingly, so that minutes could last several hours, and then flit by suddenly in unseen flocks. He comforted himself with the thought that the next phase wouldn't be too far away. And that was the good part. He would suddenly be aware that daylight had sneaked up on him, and he'd get an adrenaline rush, thinking of being the first customer at the breakfast canteen, of the mounds of sizzling fresh bacon he'd deservedly consume, of watching the poor suckers who'd slept the night away dragging their way into a day of drudgery, while he wound his way back home to the sweet caress of a sleep well earned, with sunbeams slanting onto the bed through the slits in his curtains. He'd begin to feel special, almost more than human, having gone on when lesser men would have surrendered. And, best of all, he would feel incredibly horny. Hiya, Tara. How you doing? Thank you for the sub. Thank you very much. You okay? That was a good way to end, wasn't it? Or a good way to stop the reading there. And best of all, he would feel incredibly horny. Anyway, thank you very much. I love you too. I hope you're doing well. Especially because I'm not having to do Final Fantasy tonight, which I have now finished. I hope your stream goes well tonight too. But that was all hours away, and right now it was a matter of Dwarf or Leth that he found a way to concentrate. Dwarf or Leth? He had to stop drifting. He pinched the skin of his cheeks cruelly, sipped again at the foul mouth of his coffee mug, shuddered, and forced himself to refocus on the screen. He jumped at the sudden loudness of the hangar door, sliding metallically back, thus adding stale coffee to the unnamable melange of stains and odours on his overall crotch. He cursed mentally. For the past 5 years he'd been fighting a running battle against his own natural slobbiness, and was still losing badly. The fluorescents buzzed and clicked on, filling the hangar with shocking white light. Good God, Spanners! You still here, old fruitcake? Lister tried to speak, but the coffee and tiredness had furred his throat, and what came out of his mouth sounded like the unintelligible ranting of a chronic drunk raging across the street at invisible demons. He coughed and tried again. What time is it? Ace, in full flight gear, clacked over to him. 0 hour -2. Lister's drowsy brain couldn't achieve the required arithmetical standard to subtract 2 hours from 6 o'clock. What's that then? 4 a.m. Time for you to catch some Zeds, old chumburger. The white coats come up with anything? Zipperola, I'm afraid. They've run everything through the simulator upside down and back to front. Nada. They're tearing their hair out. Damn thing should work, they reckon. You get anywhere? Lister rolled his head back along his shoulders, cracking his neck satisfyingly. There's got to be something here. It's just a matter of time. Face it, Spanners. If you hadn't found it, it's not there. You get some shut-eye. I'm going to need you for the pre-flight check. So you're only going to fit in about 90 winks anyway. Lister thought about protesting, but he couldn't work up the energy. He sighed, big time, and pushed his casted chair away from the screen. The truth was, he'd gone more or less image blind anyway. He'd watched the disc so many times, it'd become meaningless to him. Jumbled nonsense. He felt like he'd been through an all-night session of MTV. Half an hour, he said as if it were a threat. On the inspection... Oh. Blah. Half an hour, he said as if it were a threat. On the inspection trolley. You better wake me. He stood and tried to walk, but his left leg had gone dead. Too tired to bother about the pain, he simply dragged it behind him towards the trolley. Good man. Ace leaned over and stopped the disc. In the sudden silence that whistled emptily through Lister's fatigue-sensitized ears, a thought struck him. Obvious. It was obvious! Hang on! He yelled and hopped back to the video console. He hit search, play, and then pause. There! There it is! Ace peered at this flickering still frame. Suddenly, his face ignited with delight and relief. By God, Spanners, you've only gone and cracked it! Messed up a little bit there at the end, getting tongue-tied. So I apologise for that. Anyway, Chapter 5. Black Box Recording. Oh, Lister, Spanners, figured out what was wrong with the box, but we haven't found out what it is yet. They've just realised themselves. So I imagine we're going to find out in the next chapter. Unless you mean why are they checking in the first place? In which case it's because whatever it is that Rimmer is supposed to be riding out on, or Ace is supposed to be riding out on, is going to kill him, and they don't know why. It's just that the second version of the ship that teleported in from another reality, another time, had him dead, burnt alive in the cockpit. And they're trying to figure out why that is before they send him on their own ship. By checking the black box. And now that they've found it, we'll hopefully find out why. Or at least know whether or not it's going to be a safe trip. So, Chapter 5. Black Box Recording. Project 70773. Codename Wildfire. Status: Need to know only. Security clearance: AAA. Europa Test Center. Event 237. Prototype flight test. Dateline: 0600 hours. 31st of the 3rd, 81 Earth Standard. The pre-flight instrument check winked into blackness, to be replaced on the screen by a head and shoulders shot of the pilot, framed by dozens of digital readouts of the craft's various functions. His helmet was on, but his oxygen mask dangled, unstrapped by his chin, and the plexiglass of his raised visor flared in the overhead cockpit light. All checks are a go-go. Flight recorder online. Commander Rimmer leaned forward toward the camera, his hands flicking test switches on the out-of-view console below. He was clean-shaven, and it was impossible to tell he'd been up all night, or that he had any notion this flight could possibly end in his death. His clear eyes glimmered with the little boy excitement his workmanlike tone successfully concealed. There was a sudden high-pitched squeal, and he winced. Ugh. Could do without the feedback, MC. The mission controller's voice buzzed back, tiny and flat, tinny and flat, over the speaker. MC to Wildfire. Sorry about that. We're broadcasting your transmission on the base PA. Some idiot looped the wiring. Let's hope it's not the guy who did the drive relays on this crate. A laugh. That's a no-no, Wildfire. We're all go-go at this end. 0-30 from my mark. Pause. And mark. Tertiary ignition engaged. The tortured whine of jet engines built to a slow crescendo, and the image began to shudder. Ace kissed the first two fingers of his gloved hand and pressed them against the St. Christopher medallion dangling from the dash. He flicked the oxygen mask over his face and flipped down the visor. Engaging launch catapult. In the visor's reflection, the sky crept into view as hydraulic legs tilted Wildfire 1 back towards its optimum launch angle. 0-20, Wildfire. You're in launch position. The hydraulics juddered to a stop, and Ace leaned forward. Chocks away! He flicked a switch and braced his features as the spacecraft shot back into its launch silo. 0-15. You're looking good from here, Wildfire. Bet you say that to all the pilots, you old Lothario. Okay, engaging secondary ignition. Another set of jets, slow howled into life. Beginning automatic countdown. A computer voice kicked in. 10. Good luck, Wildfire. 9. MC, is Spanners around? 8. Lister's voice fist over the speaker. That's a yo, Commander? 7. Thanks for pulling the all-nighter, old love. Above and beyond and all that. 6. Don't be a ponce. Just get the smegging thing back in one piece. 5. Will do. Engaging primary. 4. Was almost drowned out by the massive belch of the main engines. One of the readout dials turned red and started flashing. 3. Abort, Wildfire. We have a hiccup on the G-force modifier. 2. Negative, MC. Rimmer leaned forward and tapped the control fascia. The readout turned green and stabilized. Loose wire. 1. Commander Rimmer gave a thumbs up. That's it, one and all. Smoke me a kipper. I'll be back for breakfast. 0. The lift-off booster kicked Wildfire 1 free of the silo. Despite the G-force modification field, the skin around Ace's eyes dragged back his features like a bad Hollywood facelift as he fought to maintain control of a craft travelling at a greater rate of acceleration than any human had ever experienced. His image quivered madly as he shot through the temporary window in the plexiglass dome and was yowling through the vacuum of space in less than 40 seconds. The speaker "Wildfire, you're a go-go." There was a tinny cheer from the control tower. The velocity readouts blurred as the monumental engines maintained their blistering acceleration out towards the gaseous whir of Jupiter's sphere. Ace struggled against the G-force to reach the control panel, his voice straining against the screaming mechanical bedlam in the cockpit as he issued his penultimate prearranged communication. "Igniting course correction jets!" Wildfire 1 pitched down towards the gas giant, using the planet's massive gravitational pull to add to its momentum. The drag looked unbearable. Ace's lips were being stretched back into an eerie, quivering grin, and the helmet's visor seemed to be bending inwards towards his face, warping the reflection of the planet's great red spot, a permanent hurricane the size of the Earth that howled relentlessly over its surface. He strained to move his arm towards the controls. 6 inches. 7. The pull snatched it back. There was a hint of muted babble from the mission control. "Won't make it! Can't reach!" Gripping the armrests of the pilot's seat, slowly, agonizingly, he edged his entire body forward. When he could go no further, he tilted his right shoulder towards the fascia and began stretching his vibrating hand out, centimetre by aching centimetre, as if it were pushing some colossal invisible stone up a hill. With a final grunting effort, he reached the switch and through teeth gritted in an exaggerated Burt Lancaster grin, he said, "Engaging Wildfire drive." The machinery's clamour ceased, and the screen whited out in the visual equivalent of the sonic boom as Commander Arnold J. Rimmer became the first living creature to break the light barrier. Just as suddenly, his image returned. Now the craft was buffeting so violently, Ace's image was blurring. The noise level in the cockpit had become unbearable. Half the digital readouts were registering red, and great clusters of the rest were following suit by the second. Ace was pinned, helpless, his body being sucked into the thick leather of the pilot's seat, which began to fold around him. The temperature reading started climbing rapidly. The plexiglass visor began to warp. Ace tried to raise his hand to tear off his helmet, but could barely manage a centimetre. His gloves began smouldering. All the readouts flashed red. The cockpit filled with choking smoke. "This is Control Center Europa. You're in violation of Space Corps airspace. Please identify yourself. Repeat, please And the AV cables melted, and there was only blackness and silence. Now we know how one Arnold J. Rimmer ended up in the position he did. At least in the other ship. But how does that save them? How does that save the present Rimmer? Chapter 6. There! It was staring at us all the time! We couldn't see it for looking! Lister's enthusiasm might have been more welcome to Admiral Tranter if A. It had been slightly more civilised hour than 5 in the morning, and B. The man's breath had smelled slightly less than a hyena's flatulence, and C. In his ebullience he had remembered it was considered impolite in superior circles to spray the listener with stale coffee-coloured spittle when speaking. What precisely had been staring at them all the time? The Admiral leaned closer to the screen and peered at the frozen image of Commander Rimmer in the cockpit. He half closed his eyes as if he were trying to unscramble a 3D Magic-Eye Trompe-l'Oeil without really expecting it to work. He waited for what he considered to be a decently contemplative interval, and then squeezed his over-cologned chin and shook his head. "Sorry, I just can't." Lister leaned forward and tapped the screen rapidly with the knuckle of his forefinger. "There!" He turned his wide-eyed grin toward the Admiral. barely millimeters from his face. There! Tranter tried to maintain his querulous smile as he was treated to a hot wave of Lister's pungent expiration. But, while his lips did a creditable job, his eyes registered an unmistakable blend of horror and nausea. He straightened to put a safer distance between himself and the hygienic threat. Alright chaps, let's not make this a guessing game. You'll have to excuse Spanners, Admiral. He's put in a 30-hour stint on this one. Gears are running a little slow. Still, he's the chap that spotted it. Only fair he. It's there! There! Lister jumped up and down, grinning, his eyebrows crescented at the very peak of their elevation. Tranter seriously considered taking his pistol out of his drawer and splattering what passed for this man's brains over the wall. He could have it framed and tell everyone it was a Jackson Pollock. The date! Check the date time readout! The date. 3103? He nodded enthusiastically, as if he were training a particularly stupid dog to sit up and beg. 31st of March? He translated. 3 days ago? Tranter maintained his cool by reflecting that it would probably be an exceptionally small Jackson Pollock. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that precisely when we recovered the craft? Yes? Ace recognized the dangerous glint in Tranter's eye and cut in. Do you see, Admiral? If this was our Wildfire 1, if we'd launched it today, if it had broken the time barrier and then showed up 3 days ago, the flight recorder would have logged today's date. Tranter glanced over at Roddenberry, the white-coated technical coordinator, who was trying his best not to look shamefaced. The date? These boffs were talking about cracking time travel, and they hadn't checked the bloody date! I don't understand. If this isn't our ship, then whose the hell's ship is it? Roddenberry cleared his throat. Well, in a way, we're not absolutely 100% 10% certain, Admiral. But I saw the test results. You assured me, did you not, that the corpse in that craft was unquestionably that of Commander Rimmer? Tranter's eyes flitted guiltily at Ace, and then carried on glaring at Roddenberry. Oh, yes, sir, I believe you said you were certain. 115% certain, as I recall. Indeed, that is also my recollection of our, conversation, Admiral, but there may be some... So would you like to explain to me how it is possible for him to be both dead and alive at the same time? Well, I believe Commander Rimmer's theory is about the best spin we can put on it. Commander Rimmer's theory? Well, I wouldn't take credit for being my theory, Admiral. I just helped thrash it out with Spanners here, and a couple of the tech boys. You see, I think our blind spot's been this breaking the time barrier business. You can understand everyone jumping to that conclusion, wanting it to be true. Damn it, I want it to be true. I want it to be true myself. Lister, long past the fatigue point where his facial muscles were sufficiently under his control to disguise his expression, was unable to conceal his astonishment at Ace's generosity. Lister had been there. The white coats had simply sat and gawped like adolescent schoolboys peeking through a hole in a nudist camp fence as the good commander pointed out the errors in their wildfire theory and outlined his own alternative, complete with diagrams and mathematical proof. The truth was that the researchers that had been rendered fact blind by the prospect of the glittering prizes that were waiting for whoever cracked time travel. A Nobel Prize or two, a lifetime ticket to the lucrative lecture circuit, and their names on the spine of an impenetrable book that would top the bestseller charts for decades. For them, the fact that their test pilot had been broiled alive by the process had been an irritant, a temporary glitch, nothing more. Some of them had actually begun working on the presentation papers to establish their authorship of the theory, rather than concentrating on the problem of Ace's impending demise. Yet, here he was, letting them off the hook. So have I got this straight? We haven't broken the time barrier then? Not exactly, Admiral. Tranter slumped into his oversized chair. He actually felt his eyes begin to sting with disappointment. He'd already rather rashly ordered a dozen new hideously expensive gold stars for his uniforms, twice as many as necessary, just in case the Admiralty saw fit to leapfrog him up a triple pipper. Ace lit one of his rare cheroots. His only vice, unless you counted an extremely active, multi-partnered sex life as a vice, which Ace didn't. I believe we've cracked the reality barrier. The reality barrier? Tranter leaned forward. He had no idea what the reality barrier might be, but it sounded good. It sounded wonderfully promotional. Let's look at the facts. 1. This pilot, let's call him the Beta Rimmer. He took off on the test flight 3 days earlier than ours was scheduled. 2. The Beta Rimmer hasn't got one of these beauties. Ace raised his shade, exposing his black eye. Where'd you get that, Commander? Tranter had heard a rumour, but it couldn't be true. Altercation with a door jam, Admiral. Ace lowered his sunglasses. And 3. I no longer possess a St. Christopher's medallion. Conclusion, the Beta Rimmer is not me. He's almost me, just not quite. Now from here on, it's speculation and prediction, but I think it's pretty solid. We believe the Beta Rimmer belongs to another reality, another dimension. If you like, coexisting with our own, but neither affecting the other, slightly out of phase. When the Beta ship hit the light barrier, it jumped out of its own dimension and into ours. So you're saying there are 2 realities, 2 universes running parallel with each other, with only minor differences in between, and the Wildfire Drive can jump between them. Why only 2, Admiral? Why not? Why just an Alpha and a Beta reality? Why not a Delta and a Gamma reality? Ace craned over Tranter's huge desk. Why not an infinite number of alternative realities coexisting simultaneously with each other? Tranter found himself wondering if this might be an appropriate juncture to avail himself of the secret supply he kept hidden in the water tank of his office bathroom. But the sun couldn't honestly be said to be over the yardarm quite yet. It was 5 a.m. The sun wasn't even over the bloody horizon. But why? Where would these realities come from? What would they be doing here? Here's the theory. Almost every day, we all make decisions that affect the course of our lives. Thousands of decisions. Should we take the job or hang on to something better? Should we end this relationship or try to work it out? Should we walk up the street or down the other one? Should we run across the road or wait for the lights to change? Should we have the ham or the chicken? Now, what if every time we made a choice that affected the course of our life, say in some other reality, the alternative were played out? Say in the Alpha universe, we wait for the lights and cross safely, but in the Omega universe, we run across the road and get hit by a truck. Here, we choose the ham and everything's okay. There, we go for the chicken and contract salmonella. Tranter reflected. In another reality then, some alternative Admiral Tranter, at this point in the conversation, would have made his excuses and headed for the bathroom. He turned the thought over in his mind for a second before deciding he might as well make it this reality. Excuse me for a second, gentlemen. He rose and padded pensively through the thick carpet to his private lavatory and locked the door. He fished out his navy rum and sucked down its dark red warmth. What did all this mean? Obviously it was intriguing. More than intriguing. If the commander were right, it was philosophically astonishing. But he couldn't immediately envisage any practical applications of the breakthrough. He couldn't imagine what use the military might make of it. In short, he couldn't be certain it would lead to a career enhancement, Gold Star-wise. He screwed the cap back on the bottle with practiced speed, liberally sprinkled his mouth with peppermint spray, and doused his chin with yet more aftershave, replaced the water tank cover, flushed the toilet unnecessarily, and padded back into his office. It's certainly a fascinating concept, Commander. Thing is, I can't quite see where it takes us. Ace looked up from the computer he was poring over with Roddenberry. The point is, something went wrong with the Beta ship. We think we know now what that something was. And more importantly, we think we can put it right. We were planning to program the Wildfire Drive for minimum burn. It's a natural thing to do. Maiden trip and all that. Don't want to push the boat out farther than necessary. But the analysis shows that's precisely what they did in the Beta reality. The result was they jumped too close. Our mathematical models predict a kind of super friction between dimensions, Something to do with incompatible tachyon densities. Don't quite follow it myself. Ace lied, having been personally responsible for discovering the superfriction equation. But basically it boils down to this. The closer the reality, the tougher the friction. That's what scorched the crate. It came in far too close to home. As best we can tell, if we increase the drive burn by a factor of 5 or 6, the superfriction will be reduced to tolerable levels. Tranter's cheeks glowed red with alcohol burn as he tried to follow Ace's logic. That sly snifter had done him no good at all. He wished he'd been in the reality where Admiral Tranter had sagely resisted the temptation to drink before breakfast. All well and good, Commander, but where does that get us, actually? Lister's features snarled as his adrenalized sense of smell caught a strong whiff of Tranter's booze breath from a good 10 paces. Lister was not naturally respectful of the chain of command. He taught himself to fight his impulsive rebelliousness over the years until his tongue resembled a Doberman's favourite pet chew. But this guy was a complete waste of airspace. Well, for one thing, Admiral, he made the epithet sound like an insult. It means Commander Rimmer might actually have a fair to middling chance to survive the jump, which, I don't know about you, but we all feel is a bit of a bonus. Tranter chose to ignore Lister's aggressive tone. Of course, I'm delighted about that. Ecstatic. What I'm driving at, chaps. Anyone can see the application of a drive that can travel through time. But what possible benefit can we adduce from a drive that can traverse realities? I mean, could we, for instance, aim for a dimension, say, where time travel has been perfected and bring the technology back? Ace exhaled a thick blue cloud of cheroot smoke. No, afraid not, Admiral. As far as we can tell, dimension travel's something of a one-way street. Look, if the infinite dimensions theory is correct, every single second of every single day, millions of people are making key choices that affect the course of their existences, each decision spawning yet another reality. It would be impossible to map a way through. Frankly, even if we thought we could find a way back, it would be impossible to establish for absolute certain whether or not the reality we returned to was the one we left. Tranter poured himself a glass of water from his unusually large carafe. So the upshot is, Commander, you're expecting me to give a green light to this trip, knowing that the best we can hope to achieve from it, he sipped, is flushing $30 billion pounds of hardware and the best pilot we've ever had straight down the Kazi. No doubt about it, he'd have to choke down his pride and send those bloody stars back as soon as they arrived. In fact, he might do well to check up on the second-hand value of the stars he was already wearing. Admiral, we're about 97% certain Wildfire 1 could fire off a tachyon message complete with digitized video footage of the new universe, so long as it got off inside, say, 15 seconds of arrival, while his trail back was still warm, as it were. Oh, much better. A blurry shot of some stars that are probably identical to the ones we've already got, and a soundbite for the news at noon. That's a fabulous return for an outlay of $30 billion. That'll probably snag me the cover Investors Chronicle. I mean, at least the original moonshots from Earth gave the world Teflon. Oh, come on, Bungo, Ace cooed. You wouldn't stop a girl going to the big dance like this, would you? Who knows where the technology could lead? We've got to try it. Now we know it's there. Lister spoke up. He was beginning to hit the feel-good phase of fatigue. He was even starting to feel horny. Admiral, if the commander can shoot off that message, it means we'll know for sure the dimensions theory is sound. Yes, wonderful. Don't you get it? If it's true, it's mind-blowing. It means that every single possibility gets played out. Everyone gets a fair share of decent shots and bad breaks. It means, in the end, there really is justice in the universe. Life means something. Admiral Tranter found himself wishing he was in another reality again. One of the realities where Lister hadn't chosen that moment to get an erection. Or at least, hadn't been too tired to notice it and cover up the fact. But no, he was stuck here in this reality, where some solitary trooper in Tranter's head was playing the last post for his career, while he stared across his desk, eye to eye with Lister's love pole, which was making an Action Man-sized tent out of his crotch of his unspeakable overalls. He directed his gaze at Ace. I'm sorry, Commander, I just don't see how I can justify. What are you made of, man? Lister leered dangerously at Tranter. It was okay to send him when you thought he was going to get toasted, but when there's no glory in it for you? Ace bounded to the desk and interposed himself between Tranter and Lister. Steady on, old love. You're not thinking straight. Tranter was rattled. You're treading a very thin line, Sonny. One more outburst like that and you'll find yourself servicing dodging cars in a fourth-rate travelling fair. Lister gently shrugged off Ace's restraining hand. Maybe. And if I'm out of line, I'm sorry. Maybe I said it the wrong way, but that doesn't change facts. What I said was true, Admiral. You've got to give him this shot. You owe it to him. Smeg, we all do. Tranter fought back an extremely compelling urge to take down the largest of his volumes on space lore and thump it down hard enough on Lister's biovac crotch. But what could he say? The little Gimboid was right. If word got out, he'd put the mockers on Ace's chance to explore what was probably humankind's final horizon. His on-base popularity would plunge below child molester level. There wasn't a man, woman or child on Europa who didn't owe some debt of gratitude to Commander Rimmer. On the other hand, $30 billion was a lot of spondulics to be blasting off to dimensions unknown. What he really ought to do is check with Central Command, who would almost certainly give it a big thumbs down. Yes, let someone else take the flak for this one. True, it would be another nail in his career's coffin, if there was room for another nail in there. But he was zugzwanged. Whichever way he moved, he lost. At least damage limitation-wise, he'd be seen to have done the right thing. He tried to look Rimmer in the face, but failed. Instead, he addressed his own warped reflection in the water carafe. I'm sorry, Commander. I'm going to have to refer this one upstairs. You what? A globule of stale coffee spittle landed on Tranter's desk. You're going to pass the buck? The one chance you've had in God knows how long, in how many years, to do something halfway worthwhile, and you're turning it down? Tranter, stunned, looked up into Lister's psychopathically wide eyes. He was convinced the oily little sod was going to clamber onto his desk on all fours and rip out his throat with bare teeth. Easy now, laddie. Ace's calm voice cut through the tension. The Admiral's right. But Lister was beyond restraint. Wake up and smell your early morning dump vinegar drawers. They'll turn it down. They always do, because it's easier to say no. Those arsewipes couldn't know a breakthrough if it... Those arsewipes wouldn't know a breakthrough if it fucked their cattle and stole their wives. If that ship doesn't fly today, they'll never fly. They'll cobweb it in some hangar, filled under pending till no one can remember what it was even built for in the first place. Now is the time. Now or never. There were some rather unpleasant words in that sentence that I didn't really want to say. Tranter's finger was hovering below the red security button concealed on the underside of his desk. He would have pressed it, but he was intrigued. Had this piece of scum really called him vinegar drawers? What did he mean by vinegar drawers? Finished, boy? Lister wasn't finished. Not quite. Look at you. You sit there behind your enormous desk in your huge office because you think it makes you look big. Well, it doesn't. You know what? It makes you look small. Tiny man. Tiny mind. You've got no magnificence in your soul, have you? Who knows what he'll find out there? Smeg, you might even chance in some far-flung reality where the base commander isn't a petty, small, little-minded lush. That did it. Tranter hit the button and 2 security guards were in the room and frog-marching Lister to the brig before he'd even had the chance to wish he'd had his mouth sewn up at birth. There. I am finding myself getting more and more bad when it comes to actually speaking properly. But that doesn't really, change much. I'm always bad at speaking properly. So I apologise for that. There. And for the tea leaf that I just inhaled. Is everyone doing okay at least? I hope. And I hope you can still manage to enjoy the reading even with my iffy reading. Yeah, there's a couple of sentences in there that I didn't really want to read because they were even less appropriate than usual. Not racist or anything, just rather unpleasant strong words that people aren't very fond of, including myself. Anyway, just gonna have a bite of my Bakewell to pour some more tea. And I'm glad you're enjoying it. I'm glad you're having fun. That's why I said fucked instead of the word that actually was being used. Which was much stronger. And much less consensual. Ah. More tea. Okay. Yeah, you can imagine what's... Some of the stuff that's being said in here is... it was written back in the... I think it was in the early 90s? Yeah, the early 90s this was written. Oh no, sorry, the mid-90s it was published. Which makes sense, given that I think this is based on the 4th and 5th chapters. No, 4th to 5th seasons of the sitcom. So it came out around then. Okay. And yeah, I'll do my best to not just slip into it wherever possible. I apologise if things are a bit rough. Right then. Chapter 7. It wasn't, strictly speaking, sunlight. This far out in the solar system, the sun wasn't a big player, energy source-wise. What passed for sunlight on the ice world of Europa was the bright orange glow of the planet Jupiter, magnified through the reinforced plexiglass dome that held the Jovian satellite's artificial atmosphere. Still, Ace Rimmer had spent most of his life under horizons dominated by the majestic disk of the king of planets, and for him, this was the skyline of home. And, in all probability, he would never see it again. He took a final drag on his cheroot and crunched it out on the rough concrete of the quadrangle. True enough, there was little to keep him here. By design, he'd always avoided forming close relationships. As a test pilot, he'd seen too many of his colleagues leave too many loved ones grieving for far too long. Married men who stayed on as JAQKs risked more than their own lives every time they took to the air. That wasn't a danger Ace had been prepared to live with. He'd always planned to have a family. Though his first love was the freedom of the cockpit of speed gave him, he knew it wouldn't be available to him forever. He had a couple, maybe 3 years of first-class flying to look forward to, and then he was going to quit the Corps. He couldn't face the deprivation of a desk job or flight training school. He didn't want to wind up like Bungo, turning his career frustrations in on himself in a wicked orgy of self-hate and self-destruction. No, what he'd planned to do, he'd probably invest in a reconditioned cargo shuttle and odd job his way around the solar system until he found a place he felt he could put roots in. Somewhere with challenge and promise. Somewhere he could settle down and breed. At least, that had been the plan. Now he was facing a one-way trip into the unknown. And he was afraid. He wasn't afraid of the mechanics of the trip. He was fairly certain his alterations to the drive would make the Jag through the reality barrier safely enough. He was afraid of what he might find. True, he had more idea than most about his destination. He hadn't told absolutely everybody absolutely everything the reality theory postulated. He knew, for example, that wherever he wound up, it would be somewhere along his own destiny line. He would encounter another version of himself, another Rimmer whose history would have diverged from his own at some point in their shared lines. Amplifying the magnitude of the wildfire leap by a factor of 5 would probably mean their paths had divided a significant while ago, possibly several years. And he was afraid of meeting himself. He was afraid this other Rimmer would be better than him somehow. A more rounded person. A Rimmer who had made better choices, who hadn't taken the frivolous option of following his lust for excitement. A Rimmer who had contributed more to mankind. To humankind. A Rimmer who would make him feel inadequate. He was saved from his maudlin mental meanderings by a woman's voice. "Commander! Commander Rimmer!" He looked up. Mamie Thurston was scattering over the parade ground from the direction of the club in heels not built for running. She reached him, breathless, and then arched, hands on knees to reoxygenate. "Commander," she panted. "Thank God! I heard you'd gone." She straightened, her face even more beautiful for the red glow of exertion. "Mamie, are you all right?" All right, I'm perfect." "Well, I'll be the judge of that, old love." He smiled and brushed a dark wisp of hair from her right eye. It flopped back immediately. "No, you're right. You are perfect." Mamie punched him playfully in the chest. "Didn't you hear? Billy Joe passed. He passed grade 1. He's got his gold wings." "Best news I've heard all year." "And it's thanks to you, you brilliant old clever custard." "Me? I think it probably had rather more to do with young Billy's flying abilities. Wouldn't you say?" "You know what I mean. He'd never have had the confidence if—" "Well, punch me in the hooter if I miss my mark, young lady. But I thought we'd agreed never to mention that little business, didn't we?" "Well, I wouldn't. Not to anyone else. Not even to Billy Joe." "Especially not to Billy Joe. Not even when the pair of you are old and grey and sitting by some glowing fire surrounded by hordes of yowling grandchildren. All right?" Mamie's cheeks flushed even redder. "You're getting a bit ahead of yourself, aren't you, Commander? He hasn't even asked me for a date." "Oh, but he will. He'll be looking for a special someone to take to his passing out ball. And unless I'm seriously lost my touch, that someone will be young Mamie Thurston." Mamie dropped her head. "You think?" "Either that or I'll really have to box his ears and knock some sense into him." She thumped him playfully again. Ace smiled. Why was a punch considered an acceptable witty riposte when administered by a young woman? If a man answered a playful remark in that way, Ace would have ranked him, in terms of intellectual capacity and social skills, alongside a TV weather presenter. When a woman do it, it just made his heart melt. She looked up and something in his smile pained her. She looked away again. "Commander, I've heard people talking around the camp. I mean, they don't understand what you're really doing for Billy Joe, and they're saying things. It makes it hard to keep it to myself." Now, people will talk, Mamie. That's just the way of the world. Sticks and stones, etc., eh?" "And that black eye, and Billy Joe will never even know what he should be thanking you." "Listen to me, young lady. The way things turned out, this little Shinaroony was the best thing that could have happened to me. You'll never know how, but this beauty saved my bacon. It's me who should be thanking Billy Joe." Ace glanced at his watch. "Time to spring spanners. Look, really must fly now, Mamie. Best of luck with the date." He kissed her tenderly on the cheek and strode off over the parade ground. Mamie shielded her eyes against the Jupiter glare, watching his sure-footed silhouette disappear into the early morning heat haze. When he'd gone, she sighed a smile and said to no one in particular, "What a guy." Okay. Chapter 8. Somewhere way off, there was an old-fashioned fire engine charging along to intercept his dream, hissing, "Lister, Lister," in between its primitive clanging. He slowly floated awake to find his left side completely paralysed from unyielding pressure his tired body had inflicted on itself. Where was this place? The walls were grey and unmarked. A dull strip light farted its bleak radiance into the tiny room from overhead. There was an unidentifiable and deeply unpleasant smell, which Lister correctly surmised could have conceivably been produced by his own body. His sleep-sluggish brain began a slow memory trawl. He'd been in this kind of place before. Yes, if he was right, he would turn his head and see bars. He turned his head. Next best thing, wire mesh. He was in some kind of cell. He swung his good leg over the side of the bench, dragging its unresponsive partner with it. Hanging onto the bench with his right hand for balance, he swung his left shoulder several times until his limp hand flopped up onto his lap and he could check his watch. 6:36. This was good. He knew where he was. He knew the time. Now, if he could only remember what the smeg he was doing here, all would be right with the world. Again he heard the hissed, "Lister, Lister," and the dull clanging of an enamel cup against the metal mesh. The voice sounded familiar. "Can you hear me, old building and loan drinking buddy?" Oh my god, it couldn't be. "Peterson!" he called timidly. "That's right. I recognise that smegging snore." What's going on? He hadn't seen Peterson in 2 years, not since he and Chrissy had been reassigned from Red Dwarf to the Europa test base. What was that mad Dane doing in the next cell? Had it all been a cruel dream? "Peterson, where are we?" Peterson's laugh rattled the mesh in Lister's cell. "Ha! That's my old buddy, all right. We're in some kind of prison, is my guess." "But we're on Europa, right?" "Could be. Yes, I think so. Blue moonish type planetoid, close to that big bastard with the red spot." "Yeah, that's Europa. Bingo," Peterson said and laughed again. Lister started massaging some life back into his dead leg. "Question is, Olaf, what are you doing here?" "It's a little hazy, but about 24 hours for drunk and disorderly, I would reckon." "Yeah, I mean, why aren't you on Triton?" "Triton? Oh yeah, that house I bought? No good. I couldn't take it. Beautiful house, but no oxygen, no gravity, and worse than that, no alcohol. Those sly bastards won't even let you smuggle it in. Honestly. I mean, hey, I don't mind floating around in a 25-bedroom mansion in a spacesuit 24 hours a day, with no neighbours for 1,000,000 miles or so. But doing it in sober was such a drag. So I signed back up for the Red Dwarf. Incidentally, the house is on the market if you're interested." "Red Dwarf's here? In space dock?" Could that be possible? That big ogre of a rust bucket had come all the way to the edge of the solar system and back here, with 18 months of mining in between. Could it really have been 2.5 years since he left? "She's here all right, baby. We put into orbit last night. At least I think it was last night. I came down on the first shuttle to see my old buddy, but no one could find you. So I went to the bar and stayed for a beer or 37, waiting for you to show. Next thing I know, you're snoring in the next cell like a wounded wild hog with asthma." "Is Lou Pemberton still on board?" "Pemberton? Sure, said I should say hello from him. He's gotten 2 promotions since you saw him last. Officer class now." Lewis Pemberton. Good luck to him. Lister smiled. He wouldn't have lasted 2 months on Red Dwarf without Lewis's roommate. He was the guy who brought Lister and Kachansky back together after their first bust-up, giving them this big speech about passion and how it can blow up and get destructive. You can't expect the first throes of love to maintain that mad intensity, but you have to guide the relationship gently into something more stable. It was Pemberton who'd encouraged him to sign up for night classes in mechanics, which helped him with his homework. Even helped him with his homework. No question, you'd be looking at a different Dave Lister right now if it hadn't been for Lewis Pemberton. I was asking around about you, Davy boy. They say you're a responsible fellow now. A father with kids even. Twins. Jim and Bexley. Just coming up 2 years old. Lister reached into his overall pocket. I've got a picture, but I don't think I can get through the mesh. That's okay. I'll just imagine I've seen it. Peterson paused and then in a dull, flat monotone said, Wow, they are beautiful. Just like their old man. But I think they have their mother's eyes. Good enough. Lister grinned. That'll do, yeah? He popped the photo back in his pocket. Question is, what's a reliable, upstanding family man like you doing in the drunk tank? Reality slapped the smile from Lister's face. I'm not in here for D&D. I'm in for gross insubordination. Oh good. Not just plain old ordinary insubordination. Gross insubordination. Nice to know you've cleaned your act up being a daddy and all. Hope you didn't chew out someone too important. Nah, Lister grimaced. Only the Admiral? Peterson whistled through his jagged teeth. Well, at least you're thinking big, Davy boy. At least you're thinking big. Smeg, you could be in here for weeks. Lister rested the back of his head against the cold brick. Months even? But that... Wait a minute, I've only got a 4-day pass. There was a horror in Peterson's voice. We won't even be able to get drunk together. Keys jangled. Metal bolts slid back from the housings and a door clanked open. Boots clinked down the metal corridor. They stopped outside Lister's cell. He looked up to see the SP on the guard's white helmet bent towards the cell's keypad. The door sprang back and the guard said, You're out of here, friend. Lister straightened up and stretched. I'm free? As a birdie? Ace stepped into the doorframe. Special clearance, Operation Wildfire. Lister stepped out into the corridor. Really? You cleared it with the old man? Ace grinned. Let's just say he won't object. Peterson's face was pressed up against the mesh. What about me? He smiled in that way that, on another face, might have come out as coquettish. On Peterson, it looked like a mad, threatening leer. He batted his eyelids. I'm thoroughly sober now, good guardian of the law. The SP turned to face him. Do you have any recollections of the events of last night, friend? Lister folded his arms and settled back to listen. He was going to enjoy this. Not surprisingly, this was a scenario in which Peterson frequently found himself, and, over the years, he'd polished his responses to such a degree he might be considered a true artist in the field of bullshit. Peterson put on his best contrite and humble look and began. I can't quite recall every single episode of my regrettable adventures with absolute precision, officer, but I'm sure I behaved in many beastly ways, for all of which I most deeply and humbly apologise. Rest assured, most respected lawman, my contrition is complete. I intend to forswear the demon alcohol which brought me into this sorry pass, and live forevermore in this blessed state of sobriety. So you don't remember, say, racing across the parade ground singing the theme from the Dam Busters and bombing the guard post with luminous urine-filled condoms? Peterson's eyes flitted up and to the left. Can't say it strikes me a chord, no. But if I did commit such a heinous deed, it would be most out of character, as I am, at all times, a thoroughly wholesome, gentle and amiable chap. Much given to poetical musings and charitable acts, as my good friend of many years with extremely high security clearance here will readily attest. He nodded encouragingly at Lister. Does your memory stretch to the part where you stole a motorcycle from the compound and scrawled obscenities all over the ornamental garden in tire marks? Did I really do that? Then I must repair forthwith to the nearest pharmacistic establishment and have them replace my medication, which, despite its salutary effect on my incurable heart condition, quite clearly produces disastrous and unacceptable side effects. There, And I'll bet you don't recollect stapling my colleague's penis to his groin. Peterson licked his lips. I don't suppose you'd consider an extremely substantial bribe. I can give you the deed to an exceptionally desirable residence on one of the solar system's up-and-coming moons. Do you have the remotest conception of the penalty for affixing a shore patrolman's genitalia to his thigh? You are history, friend. We're going to shut you in and melt the lock. Peterson turned his pleading eyes to Lister. Davy, can you help me here? Lister turned to Ace. The commander rolled his eyes and stepped forward. He's with us, Sergeant. Commander, you want me to release him? He's essential to the project. Essential to the project? What do you do? Use his breath for fuel? You can release him under my cognizance, Bob. I'll see he stays out of trouble. Reluctantly, the guard tapped the release code into Peterson's door lock. If you say so, Commander. He paused before the last digit and looked up at Peterson, who was struggling to keep the delight off his face. If I were you, friend, I'd steer clear of Reinhardt. Reinhardt? Sergeant Arden Reinhardt, the guy whose wanger you whacked with the staple gun? He had a very hot date tonight. Only his little German soldier's going to be wrapped up like King Tutankhamun for the next 2 months. And he isn't in the best of humours, last I heard. He was making plans to return the favour, only with hot steel rivets. Ouch. The door swung open and Peterson stepped free. Thanks for the warning, officer. He turned to Lister and Ace, rubbing his hands. Now then, gentlefolk and essential personnel. Let's get on with Project Wildfire. Whatever. There. I think I might call the reading there for now. Though... Oh no, there's one more chapter. Okay, one more chapter, because I'm rapidly losing my ability to talk, worse than usual, and I keep biting my tongue. And it's dreadfully affecting my pronunciation, everything else. It's bugging me. Not sure why I'm so scattered tonight. At least the tea's still good. So yeah, I apologise to everyone, because I don't seem to be reading at my best. And I've been messing up all night, and I'm not sure why. And with a little more of the cake devoured, and a little more tea. Granted that I would always recommend you put milk in if you're going to drink it with cake. We'll do the last chapter of part 2. So it's on then? Lister followed as Ace led the group across the quadrangle toward the briefing room. Peterson brought up the rear, his eyes darting nervously from side to side, searching for mad, limping Germans with high-pitched voices, brandishing rivet guns. It's on all right, Spanners. Kick off at 0800. The old man seemed pretty anti last time I saw him, so what changed his mind? You did, Spanners. Me? Another one I owe you, you old lemon tartlet. Lister shook his head. No matter how many favours Ace did you, he always made it seem like he was in your debt. What happened? He resigned. He resigned? Best thing for him, old love. He was on the brink. Maybe he'll start to enjoy life a bit now. Left me in charge of Project Wildfire. So what's the plan? Ace stopped. I'm just off to give the tech boys a final briefing. I want you to give the crate a quick once-over. I've checked it myself and it seems fairly kosher. But I wouldn't feel right if it went up without your blessing. Then I want you to help tail it over to Mission Control. If anything does go wrong on the launch, I'd rather you were up there giving me feedback. No prob. Appreciate it. Then... Ace fished in his pocket. I want you to take a couple of weeks off with the fam. I've already organised the paperwork for you and Chrissy to get leave. Here. He tossed Lister a set of keys. What are these? I've got a quaint little holiday village on Io. Nothing fancy, but a beautiful view. Own private beach. It's yours if you want it. For the whole fortnight? Permanently. Wait a minute. You're giving me your holiday home? Well, I'm not going to need it anymore, old sausage. Now am I? What about me? Peterson leaned over his chin over Lister's shoulder and grinned winsomely. Can I do you any royal small personal favours in exchange for extravagant gifts of real estate and such like? What you can do for me, matey, is stay out of trouble. My plan, absolutely. I am a reformed character. You can bet your last penny cent on that, Commander. Ace nodded, flipped an unofficial desultory salute, and headed off for the briefing room. Lister looked at the keys, then at Rimmer's rapidly shrinking figure. He shook his head. What a guy, he said. A prince, Peterson agreed. There's just one thing that's bothering me. What's that? Where in the hell am I going to get a drink at this time in the morning? Chapter 10. A chunk of grey ash tumbled from the tip of the double Churchill cigar and plopped into the bathwater, where it sizzled happily a moment and then sank beneath the sweet-scented foam. Admiral Stinkfoot No More Tranter sighed a contented plume of brown smoke into the steam-filled air and slipped deeper into the bath so that the bubbles formed an Abe Lincoln beard under his chin. He was relaxing. It felt as if he were truly relaxing for the first time in his adult life, but he chose not to dwell on that aspect of his sensation, because it would have disturbed his relaxation. He hooked his big toe, which by now resembled a large pink walnut, under the plug chain and tugged. Slowly, the water gurgled away, leaving him swathed in a suit of foam. He climbed out of the tub and padded towards the shower cubicle. He hit the cold tap and thrust himself, cigar and all, into the icy curtain of water, where he stayed until his testicles had retracted almost completely into his body. Clad only in goosebumps, he dripped his way out of the bathroom into his oversized office and dragged open the largest drawer in his gargantuan desk. He took out the service revolver, checked it was loaded, clicked off the safety and headed into the bathroom. Still chewing on the Southern Havana, he slipped his wet forefinger into the trigger guard. A part of him felt that what he was about to do was somehow sacrilegious and more than a little crazy, but frankly he didn't care much anymore. The blast from the gun was massively amplified by the tiled walls of the bathroom, and when Melissa, the Admiral's secretary, flung open the outer door, she was convinced a bomb had exploded. She was astonished that the office appeared completely undamaged. She tilted her head and peered into the bathroom. Tranter was standing butt naked with a smoking revolver in his hand and a shocked expression on his face. A thin trickle of blood oozed slowly out of his ear. He caught her movement out of the corner of his eye and turned to face her. His face split into a cheeky schoolboy grin and he said too loudly, "Bugger me, that was noisy." Melissa couldn't think of anything sensible to say, so she asked him if he was all right. The Admiral wrinkled his brow and cocked his head because he'd seen her lips move and he hadn't heard a thing, so she repeated the question at a shout. "Oh yes, never better, Melly," Tranter assured her, opening his bathroom cabinet and fishing out a roll of cotton wool. He stuffed a thick wad in each ear, aimed the revolver again and fired. He yelped with satisfaction as the bullet smashed into a full bottle of navy rum perched on the water tank above his toilet, shattering the glass and splattering the tiles and carpet with the red-brown liquor, which he had formerly used to torture his liver and poison his life. He turned to share the moment with Melissa, but she had slipped out of the office and was, in fact, running full pelt across the parade ground toward the guard post. Tranter wiggled the cigar from one side of his mouth to the other, blew the smoke from the gun barrel, and snapped the safety back on. He walked back to his office, tossed the revolver back into the drawer, and squeaked back into the huge leather recliner. He was a free man. His resignation had already been emailed to Central Command. By the time it filtered through the thick layers of bureaucratic incompetence to the correct computer screen, Commander Rimmer and the wildfire would be long gone. Tranter lifted his foot onto the desk and tapped the monitor link button with his wrinkled toe. The screen flicked on and Ace's helmeted face appeared. The takeoff dialogue blarted tinly out the speakers.
Wildfire, we're all go-go at this end. 0-30 from my mark. And engage.
Tertiary ignition engaged. Tranter smiled. In less than half a minute, $30 billion of Space Corps spondulics would be winging their way out of this reality for dimensions unknown, and none of the promotional pinching turd buggers at Central Command could do a blind thing about it. Of course, their initial reaction would be to take it out of Tranter. They might threaten to withhold his pension, or have him declared insane, or even drag him before a court-martial. But in the end, they'd back down. They wouldn't want it to be known to the government agencies who allocated budgets that the money they had flushed away pointlessly. That the money had been flushed away pointlessly. They'd build up the importance of the breakthrough, Tranter. Sorry. Losing focus again. They'd build up the importance of the breakthrough. Tranter might even come out of it a hero. Not that he cared much. Within 24 hours he'd be en route to his condominium on Venus, where he would at last be able to indulge his enthusiasm for 1/3 gravity golf, preferably with his wife, who at least still shared that passion with him. He thought they might make something of their marriage. With a little work from both sides, they might even make it all the way to happiness. He smiled to himself and shook his head softly. He felt good. He felt Ebenezer Scrooge on Christmas morning good. Born again. He'd spent so many unnecessary years trapped in this prison of a job, without realising he was his own jailer, and all he'd ever had to do was walk free. The huge blast-off of Wildfire's takeoff rockets drew his attention back to the screen. Ace's image jutted out of Europa's meagre grasp and howled towards Jupiter. The mission controller's voice zizzed.
Wildfire, you all go-go.
And the crowd in the control tower cheered mightily. Tranter smiled and tugged open another pointlessly large drawer. He fished out his Hawaiian shirt and +4s and began to dress in the only clothes that ever allowed him to feel comfortable. The clothes of his new life. Of course, there was a large element of the unknown in that new life. Even an admiral's pension wouldn't provide for an opulent lifestyle. And there was no guarantee his wife would decide to go with him to Venus. She might even make good her threats to divorce him, which would leave him fairly close to destitute. Still, whatever his future held, Tranter embraced it. As it happened, his small fears were groundless. His wife would not divorce him. They would find happiness together. And as an unexpected bonus, Tranter would finally discover the reason his career in the Corps had been stymied. It was this simple. There was another admiral in the Corps called Tranter, Dieter Tranter, a hungover clerk in Central Command that had one day mixed up their records, and no one had ever picked up on the error. Dieter was, to be blunt about it, an incompetent. Unfortunately, all his blunders found their way into Tranter's record, while Tranter's achievements were all logged on his. The worse Dieter performed, the more he got promoted. The upshot was that Peter Tranter still continued to receive full pay even after his resignation, while Dieter found his salary reduced by half. Dieter never complained. For years he'd been bewildered by his own inexplicable rise through the echelons of rank, and he simply believed he'd finally been found out and was being justly punished. As Tranter tugged on his loafers, he heard Commander Rimmer announce, "Engaging Wildfire Drive," and glanced up at the monitor as the screen whited out. That was it, the moment of truth. After an achingly stretched instant, visuals returned again. Tranter craned close to the monitor. Ace was alive. The readouts all registered within safe margins. He'd done it. The commander had leapt to a new dimension. Rimmer's voice was carried along by the promised tachyon transmission, alongside bursts of digitized Navicomp information. For a man who'd pioneered a new frontier for humankind, his voice was astonishingly calm and matter-of-fact.
Bingo, MC. The crate held up. Chalk that one up to spanners. Let's see.
His eyes flicked over the readouts.
I've arrived, but I know not where. Starscape's completely unfamiliar. 0 point of reference. That puts me gabillions of light years from home. No Class M planets in the vicinity. Don't understand that one. There must be some kind of... around... Hang on, I'm getting something. A ship.
Ace's features registered mild surprise, which, in the commander's emotional lexicon, was the closest he ever got to panic.
Oh my godfathers, it's...
And as the tachyon trail lost its integrity, the transmission spluttered and died. And that's it. It's the end of part 2. Sigh. And that beeping always shows up on my bloody VODs. Anyway. We leave with Ace Rimmer having entered the other dimension and coming across something that he couldn't report. Because it cut out. Next time, we'll be joining the crew, the other crew once again, back on Backworld. Part 3, Back to Backworld. So I'll be looking forward to that. Hopefully next time I'll actually read it properly too. Just I'm hoping. Anyway, thank you everyone for sticking around with me. And for listening in for as long as you did, putting up with my mistakes, my reading errors, my mispronunciations. Thank you to Terra for the sub. I did get used to voice acting carrying the load. It hasn't helped that I've been all stuffed up all session either. Yeah. I think my blood's low, so I don't think it helps. But anyway. Let's play it out like we usually do with you know what. The official ending theme of Red Dwarf, as played in the 1980 or 1990s TV series. So here we go. Yay. I should have left that for the credits, but oh well. Good night, everyone. Nope. Good night, everyone.